The laughter started before the money even hit the table. 5 crisp $100 bills slapped against the scarred oak surface of Murphy's saloon, while rain hammered the windows hard enough to rattle the glass. Every head in the room turned. Not because of the money, because of the woman standing beside it. May Dutton stood perfectly still near the potbelly stove, her flour-stained dress damp from the storm outside. Her broad shoulders were squared. Her hands were steady. But the heat burning behind her eyes threatened to break through years of practice, pretending she didn't hear what people said. Unfortunately, tonight they weren't whispering. 500 says she never finds a husband. The voice belonged to Vernon Pike, owner of the largest cattle operation in Grey Ridge. Several men laughed. One raised his whiskey. Another nodded. The humiliation rolled across the room like wildfire through dry grass. Too heavy, too stuck. No man wants a wife who takes up more room than his wagon. Even the bartender looked away. That hurt more than the insults, because pity was harder to survive than cruelty. May's father had died 11 years earlier. Her mother had followed 2 winters after. Since then she had built the town bakery with her own hands. She supplied bread to ranches, pies to church gatherings, biscuits to hunting camps. Half the town owed their full stomachs to her ovens, yet somehow none of that mattered. Not tonight. Tonight she was entertainment. A joke worth $500. Vernon smirked and pushed a folded paper across the table. A betting contract, signed by 6 men, official enough to feel legal, cruel enough to feel criminal. Look at it this way, boys, Vernon announced loudly. If somebody actually marries her before Christmas, Motluklunk pay every cent. More laughter. May felt something inside her crack. Not break. Just crack. The difference mattered, because broken things surrendered. Cracked things became dangerous. She stepped toward the table. The room quieted. Her gaze moved from face to face. Not angry. Not crying. Simply disappointed. You finished? She asked. Nobody answered. Then another voice came from near the back wall. A low voice. A calm voice. A voice most people in Grey Ridge heard only once or twice a year. Motluklunk take that bet. The room froze. A chair scraped backward. Several men turned. Silas Callahan stood from the shadows. 6'4", broad as a barn door, dark beard streaked with mountain dust, a long scar disappearing beneath the collar of his coat. The solitary mountain man rarely came into town. He trapped through the high ridges, sold timber, delivered pelts, then disappeared again into the wilderness above Grey Ridge Pass. Children told stories about him. Most were nonsense, but every person in the room knew one thing. Silas never involved himself in other people's business. Yet now he walked forward, straight toward May, straight toward the contract. Vernon blinked. You serious? Silas looked at the paper, then at May, then back at Vernon. Dead serious. The saloon went silent. Rain battered the roof. Somewhere outside a horse whinnied. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Vernon laughed nervously. You saying you'd marry her? Silas reached for the contract. Mort met saying the bet's accepted. May stared at him. Confusion swept through her faster than the storm outside. She had seen Silas before. Of course she had. Everyone in town had, but they'd never spoken more than a handful of words. Why would he do this? Why would a man who lived alone on a mountain risk becoming the target of every joke in Grey Ridge? The answer didn't come. Not then. Silas signed his name, folded the paper, placed it inside his coat. Then he turned toward May. His eyes were steady, serious, almost sad. "What do you like to discuss a proposal?" The room erupted, but May barely heard it, because for one brief moment she noticed something strange. As Silas moved, pain flashed across his face, a sharp pain, near his chest, as if an old wound had suddenly awakened, and for the first time that night she wondered something far more important than why he had intervened. What secret was a man like Silas Callahan carrying beneath that coat? 3 days later, Grey Ridge woke to church bells. Not funeral bells. Wedding bells. The entire town showed up. Some came out of curiosity. Others came hoping for disaster. May walked into the church wearing a simple cream-coloured dress she had sewn herself years earlier. Not because she expected to marry, because she believed every woman deserved one beautiful thing, even if nobody ever saw it. Silas waited near the altar, rigid, uncomfortable, as if facing a grizzly bear would have been easier. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. No grand declarations, no dramatic promises, just signatures, witnesses, a practical agreement. Afterward they stood outside beneath clearing skies. The town watched, waiting, judging, speculating. Silas finally spoke. "We leave in an hour." May nodded. No romance, no affection, no pretense, just honesty. Oddly enough, she preferred that. The journey into the mountains took nearly 6 hours. The road narrowed steadily until civilization vanished behind pine forests and steep cliffs. By sunset they reached his cabin. May expected something rough. What she found looked closer to survival than living. A weathered cabin crouched against the mountainside. A leaning barn, half-collapsed fencing, wood piles stacked avec military precision. Everything functional. Nothing welcoming. Silas unloaded supplies without complaint. May studied the property. The cabin. The smokehouse. The spring line. The roof. The warped hinges. The cracked storage shed. Problems everywhere. Opportunities everywhere too. Finally she turned toward him. "Why?" Silas paused. For several seconds only wind moved between them. Then he answered, "Because you deserved better than that." She frowned. "That S not enough." "Then what's the rest?" His jaw tightened. For the first time uncertainty entered his expression. Not fear. Guilt. A deep guilt. The kind that had lived with a man for years. "What can tell you yet?" May stared at him. Yet. Not never. Yet. That single word settled uneasily in her chest. Later that night she unpacked inside the cabin. The place was cleaner than expected. Organized. Careful. Lonely. One room caught her attention. A small locked storage room near the back wall. The padlock was old. Heavy. Frequently used. When she asked about it, Silas answered immediately. Nothing more. No explanation. No apology. Private. Hours later a storm rolled across the mountains. Lightning flashed. Thunder shook the cabin. May lay awake listening to rain strike the roof. Then she heard something. A sound from the next room. A sharp intake of breath. Another. Then a muffled groan. Pain. Real pain. She rose from bed. Crossed the floor. Opened the door. Silas sat hunched beside the stove. One hand pressed against his chest. Sweat covered his face despite the cold. His breathing sounded wrong. Dangerously wrong. And as lightning illuminated the room, May saw dark blood spreading slowly through his shirt. The old wound had opened. Again. Silas looked up. For one terrifying second she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of pain. Fear of being seen. Then his gaze dropped toward a small silver key hanging from a chain around his neck. A key he grabbed instinctively before collapsing to one knee. And in that instant May realized the locked room was the only secret hidden inside this mountain. Something connected that key, that wound, and the guilt Silas carried. Something powerful enough to terrify a man who feared almost nothing. Then he looked directly at her and whispered 4 words that made her blood run cold. "Don't open that room." May moved before she had time to think. Years of working alone had taught her that hesitation was often more dangerous than ignorance. Bread burned. Fires spread. People bled. And right now, Silas Callahan was bleeding. She knelt beside him as thunder rolled across the mountain. "Lie down." Mott met fine. "You've got blood soaking through your shirt." Mott met still breathing. That S not the same thing. For a moment he looked ready to argue. Then another wave of pain struck. His face tightened. The fight left him. May helped him onto the narrow couch beside the stove. She quickly fed another log into the fire. The cabin brightened, enough for her to see the situation clearly. The stain spreading across his shirt wasn't fresh blood alone. There was old scar tissue beneath it. Heavy scar tissue. The kind left behind by a wound that should have killed a man. Silas leaned back and closed his eyes. His breathing remained shallow, controlled, as if he had practiced enduring pain, which frightened her more than panic would have. "How long has this been happening?" she asked. You. He nodded once. "And you never saw a doctor?" May stared at him. That's the dumbest thing Mott heard all week. One corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. Then the expression disappeared. Outside, wind slammed against the cabin. Inside, only the crackle of fire remained. May stood. "Mott need hot water." "No." She turned. Silas was watching her now, alert despite the pain. "You don't need to treat it." The statement was ridiculous enough to make her angry. "You've got blood running through your shirt." Mott survived worse. "Mort don't care." His eyes narrowed slightly. "May." She folded her arms. For several seconds neither moved. Then something surprising happened. Silas looked away first. The mountain man surrendered. Not completely. Just enough. There's a kettle. She found it hanging above the stove. Minutes later steam filled the cabin. May gathered clean cloths from a cupboard. A small bottle of whiskey. Needle. Thread. Basic supplies. The fact that everything was organized told her something. This wasn't the first time. Not even close. When she returned, Silas was removing his coat. Slowly. Carefully. As though every movement hurt. Then he stopped. His hand touched the silver key around his neck. Again. Instinctively. Protectively. The same way another man might reach for a wedding ring. May noticed. She didn't comment. Not yet. Silas finally unbuttoned his shirt. The sight underneath nearly stole her breath. A long scar crossed the left side of his chest. Another cut ran beneath it. Old damage layered over older damage. The wound currently bleeding sat directly over the worst section. Someone had nearly driven a blade through his heart years ago. May gently cleaned away blood. Silas remained silent. Only his jaw betrayed the pain. "You were Yes. By silence. She looked up. He wasn't being rude. He simply wasn't answering. There was a difference. May returned to her work. The wound itself was life-threatening. Not yet, but years of strain had reopened damaged tissue. Without care it could become infected, and infection killed faster than bullets on the frontier. Eventually she finished bandaging the area. Silas exhaled slowly. The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, as though he rarely had reason to say them. May sat back. You re-well. For a while neither spoke. Rain continued pounding the roof. Then Silas surprised her. Again. My mother was a baker. May blinked. What? His gaze remained fixed on the fire. She baked bread for mining camps. The statement seemed random, until she realized what he was doing. Trying. Not explaining himself. Not revealing secrets. Simply offering something personal. A small piece of trust. The first piece. What day they know to know that? Most people don't. A faint smile touched her lips. Did she make decent bread? The answer came instantly. May laughed before she could stop herself. Silas looked mildly pleased, which somehow made the moment even funnier. For the first time since the wedding, the cabin felt less like a prison, more like a place where two strangers might eventually learn how to exist together. Then the moment ended. A loud crash echoed outside. Both froze. Another crash followed. Wood splintering. Silas was already standing despite his injury. Stay. Mort met not staying here while something destroys your property. The argument lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then they were both pulling on coats. Rain soaked them immediately. Lightning illuminated the hillside. The source of the noise became obvious. Part of the upper fence had collapsed, a section already weakened by age. Now several mules were pushing through the gap. Damn! Silas moved toward them. Then stopped. Pain shot through his chest. May saw it instantly. You not climbing that hill. Mort happened. The word came sharply. He stared at her. She pointed toward the barn. Get rope. He hesitated. Then obeyed. That surprised both of them. Working together, they guided the animals back inside the enclosure. The process took nearly an hour. Mud covered everything. Rain soaked their clothes. Twice May nearly slipped down the slope. Twice Silas caught her arm before she fell. Not possessively. Not dramatically. Simply because falling down a mountain would have been inconvenient. When the final mule was secured, they stood together beneath the storm, breathing hard, exhausted, and strangely satisfied. Back inside the cabin, May changed into dry clothes, then immediately began examining the damaged fence. Not physically, mentally. Calculating. Planning. Silas noticed. You do that. Look at things like they renumbered. She shrugged. The bakery survived because Mott learned bookkeeping. He nodded. Most businesses fail because owners don't. The compliment caught her off guard. Not because of the words. Because he meant them. No mockery. No surprise that an overweight woman could understand numbers. No condescension. Just simple acknowledgement. Hours later, after Silas had finally gone to sleep, May remained awake. The storm was fading. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. Her eyes wandered across the room. Past shelves. Past tools. Past supplies. Until they settled on a stack of papers near the corner desk. Curiosity won. She approached. Most were ordinary records. Feed purchases. Timber sales. Supply receipts. Then she found something strange. A tax notice. Overdue. Another notice beneath it. And another. Her brow furrowed. That didn't make sense. Silas clearly earned enough to maintain the property. Yet several payments appeared missing. Not late. Missing. The numbers bothered her. Something about them felt wrong. She searched further. Eventually she found a folded county document. The moment she opened it, her stomach tightened. The paper carried an official county seal, a land review notice. One paragraph had been marked in red ink. Property subject to potential ownership challenge pending submission of pre or claim documentation. May read it twice, then 3 times. The cabin, the land, the mountain itself. Someone was challenging ownership, and judging by the dates, the dispute had been ongoing for years. Why had Silas never mentioned it? More importantly, who wanted the property badly enough to keep fighting for it? A sudden gust rattled the windows. May looked toward the sleeping mountain man, then back at the document. That question alone was troubling. The name written at the bottom was worse, because she recognized it immediately. Vernon Pike. The same man who had laughed while betting $500 she would never find a husband. And somehow he was just interested in humiliating her. He was trying to take Silas Mountain too. As lightning flashed one final time beyond the window, May unfolded the last page attached to the notice. Her pulse quickened. A signature was missing. One critical signature. Without it, Silas could lose everything before winter arrived. And according to the deadline stamped across the bottom of the page, they had less than 30 days left. The next morning began before sunrise. May woke to the smell of coffee and fresh pine smoke drifting through the cabin. For a few moments she forgot where she was. Then she heard an axe striking wood outside. Steady. Measured. Rhythmic. Silas. She dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch. The storm had washed the mountain clean. Mist drifted through the pines below the ridge. The world looked untouched. Peaceful. Almost innocent. But the folded county notice hidden beneath her mattress reminded her otherwise. 30 days. That was all they had. 30 days before Vernon Pike could potentially strip this mountain away from the man standing beside the woodpile. Silas swung the axe again. The blade buried itself deep in a cedar round. Even injured, he moved with frightening efficiency. Unfortunately, May also noticed something else. His left arm compensated constantly. His shoulders tightened after every strike. The wound was still hurting. Badly. He was simply too stubborn to admit it. "You were supposed to be resting." The axe stopped. Silas glanced toward her. Mort met cutting. Mort noted. Silence. Then another swing. May sighed. This marriage was going to require patience. A dangerous amount of patience. Inside the cabin she prepared breakfast. Not because she felt obligated. Because hungry people made poor decisions. By the time Silas entered, she had biscuits baking, eggs frying, and coffee ready. He stopped near the table, looked at the food, then looked at her. "You didn't have to." "Mott, no." He nodded slowly. That seemed to satisfy him. They ate mostly in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Working silence. The kind that existed between people focused on surviving rather than impressing each other. Eventually May placed the county notice on the table. Silas froze immediately. Not dramatically, but enough. "You were looking through my papers." Mott was looking for clean writing paper. A partial lie. His eyes narrowed. "That's not what you found." Silas stared at the document. The lines around his face deepened. For the first time since she met him, he looked genuinely tired. "How bad is it?" May asked. He exhaled slowly. "Worse than last year." "You've been fighting this for years?" 6. May nearly choked. 6 years. Silas nodded. The answer made no sense. The property was clearly occupied. Maintained. Worked. Taxes had been paid for decades. At least most of them. She had checked. Frontier land disputes happened, but 6 years suggested something deeper. Something personal. Why does Vernon want this mountain? Silas looked toward the window. Away from her. Away from the question. That alone gave her an answer. Because innocent people usually answered directly. People carrying old scars often didn't. Finally he spoke. Because he thinks something valuable is buried here. May blinked. Mott never said he was smart. That surprised a laugh out of her. The first genuine laugh she'd had in weeks. But Silas wasn't joking. Not entirely. He rubbed his jaw. 20 years ago someone spread a rumour about silver deposits in these mountains. And people are still idiots. May shook her head. No. That was everything. She could hear it. Feel it. The rumour explained greed. Not obsession. Not 6 years. Not legal battles. There was more. Silas simply was ready to tell her. Yet. The word returned again. Yet. By mid-morning they rode into town. The trip served 2 purposes. Supplies. And records. At least that was May's purpose. The moment they entered Grey Ridge, attention followed them. Women paused conversations. Men stopped hammering. Children stared openly. News travelled fast in frontier town. The mountain man and the baker had become the biggest story in 3 counties. May ignored most of it. Years of ridicule had built strong armour. What surprised her was Silas. He noticed everything. Every whisper. Every stare. Every smirk. And although he said nothing, something about his posture changed whenever someone looked at her disrespectfully. Not anger. Protection. The distinction mattered. Their first stop was the general store. Their second was the county records office. Silas remained outside with the horses. May entered alone. The county clerk was a thin man named Harold Finch, a nervous fellow whose spectacles constantly slid down his nose. He recognized her immediately. Mrs. Callahan. The title still felt strange. Morning. Harold. What can Mott do? Mott D liked to review property filings connected to the Callahan land claim. The clerk nearly dropped his pen. That reaction told her plenty. Mort Callahan. A pause. Long enough to be suspicious. Then he reluctantly disappeared into the archive room. When he returned, he carried 3 ledgers. Heavy ones. May spent nearly 2 hours reading. Line after line. Page after page. Taxes. Transfers. Boundary surveys. Inheritance claims. Then she found it. A discrepancy. Small. Easy to miss. Deadly. One survey map listed an eastern boundary marker 27 yards away from its original position. 27 yards. Not much. Unless thousands of acres depended on it. May checked another ledger. Then another. The numbers matched. The marker had been moved. Deliberately. Someone had altered an official survey. Her pulse quickened. Who performed this revision? Harold looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Mort shouldn't discuss ongoing matters. You just... His face paled. May leaned forward. The clerk swallowed. Then whispered a name. Darius Vernon S. younger brother. County surveyor. Of course. The moment she heard it, the entire situation became clearer. The ownership challenge. The missing tax entries. The altered maps. Someone wasn't merely trying to win a legal dispute. Someone was manufacturing one. When May left the office, she found Silas waiting beside the horses. One glance at her expression told him everything. You found some... Yes. Good or... He studied her, then nodded toward the saddle. Tell me on the ride. Halfway up the mountain she explained everything. The survey marker, the altered records, the Pike connection. Silas listened without interrupting. When she finished, he remained silent for nearly a minute. Finally he said one sentence. Mott knew it. May frowned. Mott suspected. Why didn't you fight? His answer came immediately. Because suspicion isn't proof. That irritated her. Not because he was wrong. Because he was right. Proof mattered. Especially in court. Especially against men like Vernon Pike. By late afternoon they reached the cabin. But something felt wrong immediately. The horses sensed it first. Their ears flattened. Their steps slowed. Then May saw it. The barn door stood open. They had closed it before leaving. Silas noticed too. Without a word he dismounted. His expression hardened. The friendly quiet from breakfast vanished. The mountain man returned. Dangerously calm. He moved toward the barn. May followed. Inside they found chaos. Feed sacks torn open. Tools scattered. Storage crates overturned. Nothing valuable stolen, which made the damage worse, because theft had a purpose. This had a message. Silas crouched beside a broken crate. His gaze settled on something nailed to the wall. A piece of paper, freshly attached. May stepped closer. The words were simple. 5 words. Painted in black. Leave the mountain. Last warning. Neither spoke. Wind drifted through the damaged barn. A horse shifted nervously. Then May noticed something else. Near the bottom of the paper. A symbol. Small. Almost hidden. A surveyor-es marking. The same marking used on county boundary maps. The same marking she had seen beside a Pike-es name earlier that day. The threat wasn't T-anonymous. It wasn't T-random. And it wasn't bluffing. Someone had learned they were asking questions. Someone knew exactly what May had discovered. And somehow, someone had known she was inside the records office before she ever returned home. That night neither of them slept much. The threat hung over the cabin like a storm cloud trapped beneath the roof. Silas repaired the damaged barn doors until darkness made further work impossible. May cleaned the scattered feed and inventoried the supplies. Not because she felt calm, because work paid her fear from becoming larger than it deserved. By the time supper was ready, the mountain had disappeared beneath moonlit shadows. The cabin glowed softly from lamplight. Outside, the wilderness stretched endlessly. Inside, silence settled across the table. Not hostile silence. Heavy silence. The kind that comes when both people are thinking about the same danger. Finally May set down her fork. Someone followed. Silas nodded. Probably. The casual response irritated her. They knew about the records office. They knew before we got home. Yeah. May stared. You don't seem surprised. Silas chewed slowly. Swallowed. Then met her gaze. Mott met not. That answer made something click. Not a solution. A realization. This wasn't he knew. The threat. The intimidation. The legal pressure. Silas had been living vacapte for years. Alone. Without witnesses. Without help. Without anyone asking questions. Until now. And perhaps that was exactly why the situation had suddenly become more dangerous. Because for the first time someone besides Silas was digging into the truth. The realization left an uncomfortable feeling in her stomach. Not fear. Responsibility. After supper she cleared the table while Silas sharpened tools near the stove. The rhythmic scrape of steel against whetstone filled the room. Eventually she stopped beside him. "You said Vernon believes something valuable is buried here. Mott, what if he does?" The sharpening stopped. Just for a second. Then continued. "What do you mean? What if the silver story is only an excuse?" Silas remained quiet. May continued. "What if he wants something else?" The whetstone stopped completely. For the first time all evening he looked directly at her. Not through her. At her. A long moment passed. Then another. Finally he set the blade aside. "You ask dangerous questions." There usually is a difference between dangerous questions and useful ones. A faint expression appeared. Not quite amusement. Closer to reluctant respect. Then it vanished. The room grew quiet. The fire crackled softly. Outside, wind moved through the pines. Silas stared into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded older somehow. He wasn't always like this. Vern, 20 years ago he was ambitious. May folded her arms. That's not the same thing as honest. No, a brief pause. Most people don't realize that until too late. Something in his tone made her sit down again. This conversation mattered. She could feel it. Silas rarely wasted words, which meant when he chose to speak, every sentence carried weight. He started buying land after the railroad came through the region. May listened carefully. He got rich. Mott no. Then he wanted. The answer sounded simple. Too simple. But greed often was. Silas leaned back. The problem with men who spend their lives taking things is that eventually they forget where ownership ends. May considered that. The statement felt less like an observation and more like experience, as though Silas had personally witnessed Vernon crossing that line. More than once. Before she could ask another question, pain flashed across his face. Sharp. Sudden. His hand moved instinctively toward his chest. The wound again. May noticed immediately. "You need new bandage." Mort met. "You keep saying that. Because it's true. It isn't it." For several seconds neither moved. Then Silas sighed. A rare sound. Almost surrender. Fine. The word felt like a victory. A small one. But still. May retrieved clean cloths and the medical supplies. Soon he sat in the chair beside the stove while she carefully removed the old bandages. The process had become easier than the first night. Less awkward. Less formal. Trust built through repetition. One small task at a time. When the final Vekepro pay came loose, she examined the wound. The reopened scar looked better. Healing. Slowly. But something else caught her attention. A smaller scar. Older. Almost hidden beneath the larger injury. May leaned closer. "What's that?" Silas followed her gaze. Immediately his expression changed. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. Something guarded. He reached for his shirt. Too quickly. No, the answer came too fast, which meant it wasn't true. May had spent years reading customers, reading debtors, reading suppliers trying to hide mistakes. People always revealed themselves in the same ways. And Silas had just revealed something. She let the subject drop. Outwardly, inwardly she filed it away. Hours later the cabin finally grew quiet. Silas retired to his room. May remained awake, a habit formed from years of bakery work. Her mind often worked longest after midnight. She sat beside the window reviewing the copied property notes from the records office. Boundary changes. Survey discrepancies. Missing tax records. One detail continued bothering her. The altered marker. 27 yards. Why 27? Why not 20? Why not 30? The number seemed oddly specific. May stared at the figures, then suddenly froze. Her eyes widened. No, that couldn't be right. She grabbed another document, compared measurements. Then another. Her pulse accelerated. Because the shifted marker didn't merely change acreage, it changed access. Specifically, access to water. The eastern boundary contained the only year-round spring feeding the lower valley. Without it, the Callahan property became dramatically less valuable. With it, the property became essential, especially to ranchers, especially during drought years, especially to someone like Vernon Pike. The mountain itself might not contain silver, but water was worth more than silver. May sat back slowly. The entire dispute suddenly looked different. Much different. The mountain wasn't the prize. The spring was. Someone had manipulated surveys to gain control of the water source. Someone powerful. Someone patient. Someone willing to fight 6 years for ownership. A chill crawled through her. Not from the weather. From understanding. Because greed driven by money often stopped eventually. Greed driven by necessity rarely did. A floorboard creaked. May looked up. Silas stood in the doorway, half awake, watching her. You should... She held up the papers. Mott figured out why Vernon wants the land. The last traces of sleep vanished from his face. What? Silence. Absolute silence. Then something remarkable happened. Silas didn't look surprised. He looked defeated, as though she had just confirmed a truth he'd been avoiding for years. You already... His jaw tightened. May rose slowly. Anger was to the right word. Frustration fit better. You knew and never told. Mort ver kept not sure. That line. The words left before she could stop them. The room went still. Silas stared at her. Not offended. Not angry. Simply caught. Because they both knew she was right. Finally he looked away. And in that moment she realized something important. The strongest mountain she had ever met wasn't hiding information because he didn't trust her. He was hiding it because he was afraid of what came next. That realization frightened her more than any threat nailed to a barn wall. Because brave men feared very few things. When they did fear something, there was usually a reason. A long silence followed. Then Silas spoke quietly. There's something else. May felt her heartbeat quicken. Something else. Not about the land. Not about the spring. Something personal. Something buried deeper. Silas looked toward the locked storage room at the back of the cabin. The same room he had forbidden her to enter. Then he said 7 words that changed everything. The land dispute started after a death. May froze. Outside, the wind howled through the darkness. Inside, the fire crackled softly. And for the first time since arriving on the mountain, May realized this wasn't just a battle over property. Someone had died, and whatever happened 20 years ago was still controlling the lives of everyone involved, including Silas, including Vernon, maybe even including her. Then Silas whispered a name she had never heard before, and the instant he spoke it, someone slammed violently against the cabin door. The impact rattled the entire cabin. May instinctively stepped backward. Silas was already moving. Every trace of fatigue vanished. The wounded mountain man disappeared. Something harder took his place. He grabbed the rifle hanging beside the fireplace and positioned himself between May and the door. Another violent bang echoed through the room. Wood groaned. The hinges strained. Whoever stood outside wanted to be heard, not invited. Silas cocked the rifle. Stay behind. May ignored the order and grabbed the cast-iron poker from beside the stove. That earned her a brief glance. Not annoyance. Approval. The third blow struck. Then a voice came through the storm. Silas, a man's voice. Desperate. Panicked. Open the damn door. Silas relaxed slightly. Only slightly. He lowered the rifle and opened the door. A gust of freezing wind exploded into the cabin. A man stumbled inside. Mud covered his clothes. Blood streaked one side of his face. His horse was nowhere in sight. May immediately recognized him. Harold Finch, the county clerk. The same man who had handed her the survey records earlier that day. Harold nearly collapsed. Silas caught him before he hit the floor. What happened? Harold struggled to breathe. The room went still. They know what? May asked. Harold looked directly at her. His eyes were filled with genuine fear. A chill moved through her body. What record? The copies. His voice cracked. The survey records. The boundary revisions. The altered filings. Silas shut the door. Locked it. Then turned back. Harold swallowed. They came after me. May's grip tightened around the poker. They? The clerk nodded. Two. Silas knelt beside him. Names, not day-day Nazi faces. A pause. But Mort recognized one horse. The answer was enough. Everyone in Grey Ridge knew Vernon Pike's stable. His horses were worth more than most houses. Harold's hand shook violently. They searched my office. After you left, May exchanged a look with Silas. That was impossible. Or should have been. Unless someone had been watching the records office all day. Watching her. Watching who she spoke to. Watching what documents she requested. Harold pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. His hand trembled so badly he nearly dropped it. Silas unfolded it. May stepped closer. The paper contained only a few lines. Yet the words felt heavy enough to bend the room around them. Stop asking questions about the Eastern Survey. Next time one miss. Nobody spoke. The threat required no interpretation. Harold closed his eyes. They shot at me on the road. May stared. Mott left town after dark. His voice shook. Mott thought somebody was following. He swallowed. Then continued. There was a rifle shot from the trees. The room became painfully quiet. Frontier arguments happened. Property disputes happened. Threats happened. But attempted murder. That changed everything. Because once violence entered a conflict, the rules changed too. Silas folded the paper carefully, almost thoughtfully, which somehow frightened May more than anger would have. "What are you thinking?" she asked. The mountain man looked toward the fire, then toward the storm outside. Finally he answered. They re-scared. May blinked. They re-escalate. His gaze settled on the threat letter. People only do that when they re-losing control. The statement made sense. Unfortunately, it also created a more dangerous question. What exactly were they trying so desperately to hide? Harold remained at the cabin overnight. There was no safe alternative. The roads were dangerous. The weather was worsening. And somebody had already tried to kill him. May prepared the spare cot, fed him hot stew, cleaned the cut above his eye. By midnight the clerk was finally asleep. Silas remained awake, sitting beside the fire, watching the flames, watching the darkness beyond the windows. Watching, always watching. May approached quietly. "You think they won't come back?" His answer came immediately. Not reassuring, not comforting, just honest. She sat across from him. For a while neither spoke. The fire popped softly. The storm weakened. Eventually May broke the silence. What was the name? Silas looked up. The name you mentioned before Harold arrived. Understanding crossed his face. The conversation interrupted hours earlier. The death. The secret. The name. Silas stared into the flames. For a long time. Long enough that May almost thought he would answer. Then he did. Thomas Dutton. The room seemed to tilt. Just slightly. May frowned. That S impossible. Silas nodded. Yes, Thomas Dutton. Her father. The man buried 11 years ago in the church cemetery outside Grey Ridge. The man who taught her to knead dough, repair wagon wheels, read ledgers. The man she still missed every single day. Her father. What does my father have to do with this mountain? Silas didn't answer immediately. The hesitation frightened her, because there was grief in his eyes. Real grief. Old grief. The kind carried for decades. Finally he spoke. He saved my life. May stared. What? 20 years. Nothing made sense. Nothing. Her father had never mentioned Silas. Not once. And yet the emotion in the mountain man's voice could not be faked. Silas stood. Crossed the room. Retrieved a tin coffee pot from the stove. Anything to avoid looking directly at her. He worked for the previous owner. The mountain? A nod. He handled accounts. That sounded exactly like her father. Thomas Dutton trusted numbers more than people. Always had. He discovered. May felt her pulse quicken. The survey. No. Silas finally turned. And for the first time since she'd met him, genuine anger appeared beneath his calm exterior. He discovered theft. The word landed heavily. Theft. Not rumour. Not suspicion. Theft. Someone had been stealing, and Thomas Dutton had found proof. May's throat tightened. Silas looked toward the darkness outside. Toward the valley. Toward Grey Ridge. Toward the town sleeping beneath the mountain. Then he answered. Vernon S. father. The room went silent. May felt cold despite the fire, because suddenly the timeline became terrifyingly clear. Thomas Dutton discovered financial crimes. The Pike family became involved. A man died. 20 years later, Vernon Pike was still fighting for this land. No. Not fighting. Covering something. Protecting something. The difference mattered. And if that was true, then her father's death 11 years ago suddenly felt less certain. Silas must have seen the thought appear on her face, because he immediately shook his head. What? Dante, go there. May stood. Her heart hammered. You don't know where Mott met going. Yes. Mott do. Silas' voice was unusually firm. Your father died from pneumonia. The certainty sounded genuine, yet uncertainty remained. Because the questions were multiplying faster than answers. Then why keep all this secret? Silas looked away. Again, always away when the truth approached. Because Mott promised, the answer came quietly, almost too quietly to hear. May froze. Promised. Her father. A promise. Something hidden. Something protected. The pieces hovered just beyond reach. Close enough to see. Too far away to understand. Then another thought struck her. A terrible thought. If her father discovered theft, if the Pike family knew, if people were willing to threaten witnesses even now, then maybe this entire dispute had never been about the land. Maybe the mountain contained evidence. Records. Documents. Proof. Something dangerous enough that 3 generations of men had fought over it. A sudden crash erupted outside. Both spun toward the window. This time the sound came from the barn. Silas grabbed the rifle instantly. May seized the lantern. They rushed into the darkness. The cold night air hit like ice. The barn door stood open. Again. But this time the damage was worse. Much worse. Because nailed directly to the center beam was something new. A photograph. Old. Faded. Weathered by years. The lantern light trembled in May's hand as she stepped closer. Then her breath stopped. The photograph showed 3 people standing beside the very spring Vernon Pike wanted so desperately. A younger Silas. A younger Thomas Dutton. And a third man whose face had been deliberately scratched away. Across the bottom someone had written 6 words in fresh black ink. Axillus, what really happened? For several seconds nobody moved. The lantern trembled in May's hand. Not because of the cold. Because of the photograph. The image looked as though it had been taken decades earlier. Long before Grey Ridge became prosperous. Long before Vernon Pike controlled half the valley. Long before May had been old enough to remember much of anything. Yet there was no mistaking the faces. Her father. Silas. And a third man whose identity had been violently erased. Deep scratches carved through the image. Deliberately. Repeatedly. As if someone hated the very memory of him. Silas stared at the photograph. His expression emptied. That frightened May more than anger would have. The mountain man rarely showed emotion. But when he did, it was real. What she saw now wasn't rage. It was regret. Raw. Ancient. Still bleeding after 20 years. What happened? She asked quietly. Silas didn't answer. The silence stretched. The lantern hissed softly. A horse shifted nervously inside the barn. What happened? Silas. His jaw tightened. For one terrible moment she thought he might walk away. Instead he reached out and carefully removed the photograph from the beam. His fingers lingered on the image, especially near Thomas Dutton's face. Then he spoke. Not back inside the cabin. Harold remained asleep. Exhaustion had finally defeated fear. Silas placed the photograph on the table. The firelight illuminated every faded detail. Every scar. Every secret. May sat opposite him. Waiting. The mountain man stared at the image for so long she wondered whether he could still see the past hidden inside it. Finally he exhaled. The third man was named Eli Mercer. May repeated the name silently. Eli Mercer. Unknown. Forgotten. Yet clearly important. Who was the owner of this mountain? May blinked. The original. A nod. That immediately complicated everything, because the county records listed the property under the Mercer family before the Callahans. Yet most people believed Eli had simply sold the land and disappeared. That story had circulated for years. Apparently it was true. What happened? Silas looked toward the fire. The answer came quietly. He died. May felt a chill. The same word again. Death. Always death. Always circling the edges of this mystery. How? Silence. Then, they said it was an accident. Said. Not was. Said. One word. One enormous difference. May noticed immediately. You don't believe that? The mountain man looked at her. The answer carried no hesitation whatsoever. None. And suddenly the room felt smaller. The air heavier. Because if Eli Mercer hadn't died accidentally, then somebody had lied. A very long time ago. Silas leaned back. The fire reflected in his eyes. Eli discovered missing mother. May's pulse quickened. The same theft. The same secret. The same corruption her father later uncovered. The threads were finally beginning to connect. He knew someone was stealing from supply contracts. Silas continued. He asked Thomas to audit the books. May nodded slowly. That sounded exactly like her father. Methodical. Precise. Impossible to intimidate once he found a discrepancy. The numbers led back to the Pike family. Another piece clicked into place. Not Vernon. His father. The previous generation. The original crime. The foundation beneath everything. What happened? Silas stared at the photograph. Eli wanted evidence. And he found it. The room went quiet. May barely breathed. Because everyone knew what usually happened when honest people found proof against powerful men. Silas rubbed the scar on his chest unconsciously, a habit she had begun noticing. He planned to take everything to the county judge. The mountain man paused, then continued. He never got the chance. A log shifted in the fireplace. Sparks drifted upward. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. Inside, the story finally moved closer to its heart. The night before the hearing, Silas said, Eli rode into the mountains. May already knew the ending. At least part of it. He never came back. Silas nodded. They found his horse. A pause. Not. The words settled heavily between them. May stared. What? For the first time, uncertainty entered the story, because death without a body wasn't really death. Not entirely. Frontier life taught people that. Bodies mattered. Proof mattered. Without proof, questions survived. Silas reached for the photograph. There was an investigation, and no, the answer sounded bitter. Years old. Still fresh. No witness. No evidence. No. May understood. Or rather, she understood enough. The Pike family possessed money. Influence. Connections. An investigation could disappear surprisingly quickly under those conditions. Especially 20 years ago. Especially in a growing frontier town. Then another thought struck her. One she somehow overlooked. Silas looked up. The night Eli disappeared, the question hung in the room, neither pleasant nor comfortable, but necessary. Eventually he answered. Mott was with him. May froze. Everything stopped. The fire, the wind, the room itself. For a heartbeat she heard nothing. Silas held her gaze. Steadily, honestly, painfully. Mott was the last person who saw him alive. The confession landed like a hammer. May sat motionless. Not because she suspected him. Because she suddenly understood the guilt he'd been carrying. The guilt she'd seen from the beginning. The guilt that haunted his eyes whenever the past approached. The guilt connected to the wound. The locked room. The promises. Everything. Silas looked away, toward the darkness beyond the window. I should have stopped it. The words were barely audible. May stared. Stopped what? The mountain man swallowed. For several seconds she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he did. Motte Ave kept them. Her pulse accelerated. The men following Eli. The room went still. Mott knew something was wrong. His voice sounded distant now, like a man speaking across 20 years. Mott followed. A pause. Mott ve kept net fast enough. May's heart tightened, because she suddenly kept what came next. Not the details. The consequence. Silas touched the scar beneath his shirt. The old wound. The wound he refused to discuss. The wound connected to everything. When Mott reached the room, his voice faltered. Just slightly. Someone put a knife in my chest. May closed her eyes briefly. There it was. The truth. Or part of it. The scar wasn't T from a random fight. It was T from war. It was T from an accident. It was connected directly to Eli Mercer's disappearance. Directly to the Pike family. Directly to the mountain. Directly to her father. Silas continued staring into the flame. By the time Mott woke up, Eli was gone. Gone. Not dead. Gone. The distinction mattered. Again. May leaned forward. Did you tell him? A bitter laugh escaped him. The first she'd ever heard, and it carried no humour whatsoever. Mott tried. The answer chilled her. What happened? They said fever made me confused. May's jaw tightened. Of course they did. A wounded man. No witnesses. Powerful families. Convenient explanations. The story practically wrote itself. Then another realization struck. A larger one. A more dangerous one. If Eli Mercer never reached court, and if Thomas Dutton later uncovered the same theft, then perhaps her father hadn't merely inherited old records. Perhaps he'd inherited Eli's evidence too. The possibility sent a shiver down her spine. Silas noticed immediately. May looked at him, then at the photograph, then back again. My father knew. The mountain man remained silent. She continued. He knew enough for somebody to ask him to protect evidence. Silas' expression changed. Not much. Just enough. Recognition. Fear. Understanding. Because he had reached the same conclusion. At exactly the same moment. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The implication was obvious. Somewhere. Somehow. Proof still existed. Proof capable of exposing 20 years of lies. Proof powerful enough to make people threaten witnesses. Alter records. Attack county clerks. Fight legal battles. And terrorize anyone asking questions. A sudden noise interrupted the silence. 3 sharp knocks. From the cabin door. Everyone froze. Harold sat upright instantly. Awake. Terrified. Silas rose slowly. Rifle already in hand. May grabbed the lantern. Nobody knocked again. Not immediately. Then a voice came through the darkness. Calm. Confident. Dangerously polite. Evening. Silas. May felt her stomach tighten. She recognized the voice. So did Harold. So did Silas. Because only one man in Grey Ridge sounded that comfortable while standing outside another man's home after midnight. Vernon Pike. And from the look on Silas' face, Vernon was supposed to know they had found the photograph. Nobody moved. The midnight silence inside the cabin felt fragile enough to shatter. Harold looked ready to faint. May's grip tightened around the lantern. Silas remained perfectly still. The rifle rested comfortably in his hands. Not threatening. Not nervous. Simply ready. Another knock echoed through the cabin. Slower this time. Almost friendly. Come now. Silas, Vernon's voice called through the darkness. We neighbours. No need to pretend you aren't awake. The mountain man exchanged a glance with May. Something passed silently between them. A warning. Then Silas walked to the door, unlocked it, and opened it. Cold mountain air rushed inside. Vernon Pike stood on the porch holding a lantern. 2 riders waited behind him near the tree line. Their faces remained hidden beneath hats and shadows. The sight immediately irritated May. Because Vernon hadn't come alone. Men who arrived peacefully rarely brought backup. Vernon smiled. His polished boots gleamed despite the muddy road. His expensive coat looked out of place on the mountain, like wealth trying to disguise itself as hard work. His eyes drifted past Silas, toward the interior of the cabin, toward May, toward Harold. He noticed everything. Of course he did. Quite a gap. Nobody answered. Vernon's smile widened. Mott heard poor Harold had a difficult evening. Harold visibly flinched. That reaction told May more than any confession could. Vernon noticed too. The rancher-S expression never changed, which somehow made it worse. Finally Silas spoke. What do you want? Direct. Simple. Very Silas. Vernon chuckled softly. Business. It's midnight. Business does the always respect the clock. The answer sounded rehearsed. Prepared. Vernon had come for a reason. A specific reason. And everyone knew it. He reached inside his coat. May instantly tensed. So did Silas. But Vernon only removed a folded document. A legal document. Official county paper. Complete with seals and signatures. The sight immediately made May nervous. Because powerful men preferred paperwork when possible. Violence created witnesses. Documents created ownership. Vernon held the paper up. Mort came to deliver this personally. Silas didn't take it. Eventually Vernon stepped forward and placed it on a nearby table. Then he removed his gloves slowly. Deliberately. As if he intended to stay a while. County hearing has been moved up. The room froze. May immediately grabbed the document. Her eyes scanned the page. Then widened. 21 days. Not 30. 21. The deadline had been shortened. By more than a week. Her stomach tightened. That wasn't T-normal. That wasn't T-procedural. That was manipulation. And Vernon knew it. The satisfaction in his eyes practically glowed. You had this change. Vernon smiled politely. A lie. A perfect lie. The kind impossible to prove. The county simply wishes to resolve the matter quickly. Harold nearly laughed. A terrified laugh. The kind people make when truth becomes absurd. Everyone knew exactly how much influence Vernon Pike possessed in Grey Ridge. County commissioners. Surveyors. Bank officials. Land agents. He had friends everywhere. Vernon looked toward May. His smile softened slightly. Almost sympathetic. Which made her dislike him even more. You should think carefully before involving yourself in this matter. Mrs. Callahan. There it was. The real reason he'd come. Not Silas. Her. May folded the document carefully. Mort met already involved. His expression barely changed. Yet something colder appeared beneath it. A glimpse. A crack. The mask slipping. Some things are older than you realize. May met his gaze. So are lies. The room went silent. One of the riders outside shifted uncomfortably. Even Harold looked shocked. Vernon's smile disappeared entirely. For the first time. Good. Finally. The man beneath the charm emerged. And he wasn't pleasant. Your father understood when to stop asking questions. The words landed like a slap. May's heartbeat stopped. For half a second. Then accelerated violently. Silas moved immediately. One step forward. The rifle lowered slightly. Dangerously. The warning carried enough weight to make even Vernon pause. The two men stared at each other. Years of history hidden beneath the silence. Years of hatred. Years of unfinished business. Eventually Vernon adjusted his coat. His confidence returned. Or at least the appearance of it. Mort came to offer advice. No, May said quietly. His eyes shifted toward her. You came to threaten us. Silence. Then a faint smile returned. The worst kind, because it confirmed everything, without admitting anything. Vernon turned toward the door, apparently deciding he'd pushed far enough. But before leaving he stopped. Just once, then looked directly at Silas. "She's starting to ask the same questions," Eli asked. The room became still. Completely still. Vernon nodded toward May. "And the same questions," Thomas asked. His gaze hardened. "Ask yourself how that ended." Then he left. The door closed. The sound echoed through the cabin. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Several seconds passed. Then Harold whispered the obvious. "He knows." May nodded slowly. Yes. He knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to be worried. Enough to be dangerous. Enough to reveal something without meaning to. Because Vernon had just confirmed a critical truth. Thomas Dutton and Eli Mercer hadn't been investigating separate problems. They'd been following the same trail. The same evidence. The same secret. After Vernon finally disappeared down the mountain road, nobody returned to sleep. Instead, they worked. The hearing deadline changed everything. 21 days. 3 weeks. Not enough time to waste. At sunrise, May spread every document across the table. Tax records. Survey copies. Property maps. Old receipts. Boundary reports. The cabin transformed into a temporary records office. Harold assisted where possible. Silas supplied coffee. And for the first time all three worked toward a single objective. Finding proof. Hours passed. Then more hours. By afternoon May noticed something strange. A missing year. Not missing completely. Missing selectively. Several financial ledgers referenced transactions from 18 years earlier, yet the corresponding accounting book had vanished. The gap stood out immediately, like a missing tooth. Harold noticed too. That ledger should exist. May looked up. Should. The clerk nodded. County regulations required duplicate copies. Duplicate copies. The word struck her instantly. Because duplicates changed everything. If one version disappeared, another might survive. Somewhere. May stood so quickly her chair nearly fell over. Where would they be? Harold frowned. The original county archive. Silas looked up. The clerk hesitated. Then answered. Old courthouse basement. May blinked. The abandoned courthouse? A nod. Grey Ridge S original courthouse had burned partially years earlier. Most records were transferred afterward. Most. Not all. The basement remained sealed. Ignored. Forgotten. Exactly the sort of place old evidence survived. Hope surged through her. The first real hope she'd felt since arriving on the mountain. Then Silas spoke. Quietly. Dangerously. Someone else will realize that too. The excitement faded immediately. Because he was right. If they understood the significance of the missing ledger, so could Vernon. And Vernon possessed far more resources, far more men, far more influence. The race had begun. May looked down at the photograph still resting near the corner of the table. The image of her father, Silas, Eli Mercer, 3 men connected by a secret large enough to survive 2 decades. Then another realization struck her, a realization so sudden she nearly missed it. The photograph itself. Her eyes narrowed. She grabbed it, studied the edges, the back, the corners, then froze. "What is it?" Silas asked. May slowly turned the photograph over. Hidden beneath years of dirt and fading, Something had been written in pencil. A note, almost invisible. A location neither Vernon nor anyone else had apparently noticed, because the words were hidden beneath the photograph frame itself. May's pulse thundered. Silas leaned closer. So did Harold. Together they read the faded message, and the moment the final word became visible, Silas went pale, because the note didn't point toward the courthouse. It pointed toward the locked room inside the cabin, the room he had forbidden May to enter, and beneath the location was a sentence written in Thomas Dutton's unmistakable handwriting. If anything happens to me, the truth is inside. Nobody spoke. The words seemed to absorb all sound inside the cabin. If anything happens to me, the truth is inside. Thomas Dutton's handwriting. May knew every curve of those letters, every angle, every habit. She had watched her father fill ledgers for years, had watched him leave notes inside flower accounts and supply books. There was no possibility of mistake. The message belonged to him, and somehow it had been hidden for nearly 20 years. Silas stared at the photograph. His face had gone completely still. May had begun recognizing that expression. Whenever emotion became too large to contain, the mountain man hid behind stillness. It was the closest thing he had to armor. Harold looked from one of them to the other. His voice barely rose above a whisper. The locked room. Nobody answered, because everyone was thinking the same thing. If Thomas Dutton had hidden evidence there, if Eli Mercer had disappeared protecting it, if Vernon Pike had spent 6 years fighting for the property, then whatever sat behind that locked door might explain everything. The realization was exhilarating and terrifying. May slowly looked toward the back of the cabin, toward the room, toward the old iron lock, toward 20 years of unanswered questions. Silas followed her gaze, then quietly reached beneath his shirt. The silver key appeared, the same key he had protected instinctively every time his wound flared, the same key he had guarded more carefully than money, more carefully than weapons, more carefully than his own life. For several seconds he simply held it. Then he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The decision had finally been made. Mott promised. May met his gaze. Mott promised Mott never open it unless. His voice faded. He did need to finish. Unless the time came. Unless the truth was needed. Unless keeping the promise meant finally breaking it. Slowly Silas stood. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. One step. Then another. Until he stopped before the locked door. The old key slid into place. Metal scraped softly. A sound 20 years in the making. Then the lock turned. The click echoed through the room. Nobody moved. Not yet. Silas rested his hand against the door. For a moment May thought he might stop. Walk away. Change his mind. Instead he pulled it open. Dust drifted through the lantern light. The room beyond was small. Smaller than May expected. No treasure. No hidden silver. No secret vault. Just shelves. Boxes. Books. Ledgers. Paper. Hundreds and hundreds of pages. A lifetime preserved inside a forgotten room. Harold exhaled sharply. Oh my God. The words escaped before he could stop them. May stepped inside first. Dust coated everything. Years of silence covered the shelves. Yet the room felt strangely alive, as though the people who built this secret archive had only stepped away moments earlier. She approached the nearest shelf. Accounting ledgers, supply records, survey books, receipts, correspondence, everything carefully labelled. everything meticulously organized. Exactly what her father would have created. Exactly what Eli Mercer would have needed. Silas stood near the doorway, watching, remembering, grieving. May reached for one of the ledgers, opened it, then froze. The numbers immediately looked wrong, not because of mistakes, because of patterns, repeated patterns, the same missing payments, the same inflated contracts, the same diverted funds, year after year. The theft had been real, and far larger than anyone imagined. Harold moved beside her. His eyes widened. These are county contracts. May nodded. Motton. Road construct. Another page. Bridge repair. Another. Water projects. Another. Rail transport. The clerk's face paled. Because the theft wasn't T-isolated. It was T1 crime. It was T1 transaction. The Pike family had apparently been draining public funds for years, possibly decades. The scope felt overwhelming. Then Silas spoke, quietly. Keep looking. May turned another page. Then another. Eventually she found something different. A leather folder. Smaller. Older. Hidden behind the ledgers. The cover contained only 3 initials. E.M. Eli Mercer. Her pulse quickened. Slowly she opened it. The first document inside was a witness statement. The second was a financial audit. The third was a sworn affidavit. May skimmed the pages. Her heartbeat accelerated. Because the names were familiar. Painfully familiar. Pike. 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 Again and again. The evidence was devastating. Enough to destroy reputations. Enough to start criminal investigations. Enough to explain why someone had disappeared. Then she reached the final page. And everything changed. The room vanished. The mountain vanished. The world vanished. Only the paper remained. Because attached to the last affidavit was a birth certificate. May stared. Confused. Then shocked. Then unable to breathe. The document wasn't hers. It wasn't T. Eli S. It wasn't T. Silas. The name belonged to another child entirely. Yet one detail immediately stood out. The father's name. Vernon Pike. The room spun slightly. Harold leaned closer. What? May handed him the document. The clerk read silently. Then went pale. Silas crossed the room. Took the paper. Read it once. Then again. His face hardened. Not with surprise. Recognition. As though he'd hoped never to see that page again. What does this mean? May asked. Silas didn't answer immediately. Eventually he placed the document carefully on the table, then looked directly at her. It means Vernon has been lying for 20 years. The answer solved nothing. And everything. Because according to the date on the certificate, Vernon Pike had secretly fathered a child long before his marriage. A child hidden from the town. Hidden from county records. Hidden from everyone. The birth alone wasn't criminal. The cover-up wasn't enough to explain murder. But something about the document terrified Vernon. May could feel it. The answer sat just beyond reach. Then Harold discovered another page attached beneath it. A court filing. Never submitted. Never recorded. Never completed. The clerk unfolded it slowly. Read the first paragraph. Then suddenly sat down. Hard. As though his legs had failed. What? May asked. Harold looked up. His face had lost all colour. That child. He swallowed. Then looked toward Silas. Then toward May. Then back to the document. The child wasn't even an S. Silence. Absolute silence. May felt her pulse hammering. "What are you talking about?" The clerk held up the filing, his hand visibly shaking. It was a paternity challenge. Nobody breathed. The child legally belonged to someone else. The room went still. The fire crackled softly in the next room. Outside, the mountains slept beneath moonlight. Inside, 20 years of assumptions began collapsing. Because if Vernon was to the father, then why claim the child? Why hide the records? Why destroy evidence? Why spend decades protecting the secret? Then May saw the second name written on the filing, the real Father S name. And the moment she read it, every hair on her arms stood up, because the father listed on the document was Eli Mercer. The missing man. The dead man. The man who supposedly disappeared 20 years ago. And suddenly May understood something horrifying. This had never been a fight over stolen money, or land, or water. Those things mattered, but they weren't at the heart of it. The heart of it was inheritance, blood, ownership, family, and if Eli Mercer had a child, a legitimate heir, then someone standing in Grey Ridge today might legally own far more than a mountain. A sudden gunshot exploded outside the cabin. The window shattered. Glass rained across the floor, and a voice roared from the darkness. "Burn the place down." The second gunshot hit the barn. Wood exploded. A horse screamed. Then chaos erupted. Silas was already moving before the glass finished falling. He grabbed May's arm. Not dragging her. Guiding her. She dropped instantly. Harold followed half a second later. Another rifle shot tore through the darkness outside. The bullet smashed into the stone chimney. Dust rained from the ceiling. The attack had begun. For years the battle over the mountain had hidden behind paperwork. Survey maps. Court filings. Tax records. Threats. Now the masks were gone. Whoever stood outside intended to destroy everything, including the people inside. Silas crouched beside the broken window. Rifle ready. Listening. Always listening. A skill learned from years in the wilderness. May forced herself to stay calm. Panic wasted time, and time was suddenly precious. "How many?" she asked. Silas tilted his head. Another horse snorted outside. Then another. Then another. 4. Harold paled. 4. Silas nodded. Maybe 4. The clerk looked ready to collapse. May couldn't blame him. He was built for gunfights. He was built for ink and ledgers. Unfortunately, tonight those skills wouldn't stop bullets. A bottle shattered outside. Glass. Liquid. The smell reached them seconds later. Lamp oil. May's stomach tightened. "Oh no." Silas' expression darkened immediately. They weren't trying to intimidate anyone. They were preparing a fire. A very large one. Another bottle crashed against the barn wall. Oil spread across old timber. Dry timber. Dangerously dry timber. The realization hit everyone simultaneously. The barn wasn't the target. The cabin was. The records were. The evidence. Everything hidden inside the locked room. The attackers didn't need to win in court. They only needed to destroy proof. Silas looked toward May. "Get the ledger." She was already moving. Together she and Harold rushed into the storage room. The shelves suddenly looked impossibly large. Hundreds of records. Thousands of pages. A lifetime of evidence. Far too much to carry. May forced herself to think. Not emotionally. Practically. The most important items. The irreplaceable items. She grabbed Eli Merced's folder, the financial audits, the sworn statements, the survey copies, the birth records, everything connected directly to the case. Harold stuffed documents into burlap sacks. His hands shook violently, but he kept moving. Outside, another bottle shattered. Then another. Silas fired. The rifle report thundered through the night. A scream followed. One of the attackers. Hit. Or at least frightened. Then came return fire. 3 shots. 4. Wood splintered. The cabin walls absorbed the impact. May's heart hammered. The mountain itself seemed to shake around them. Finally they carried the evidence into the main room. Silas glanced toward the sacks. Good. Then immediately returned to watching the darkness. A faint orange Gerlo Vacep appeared beyond the window. May's blood ran cold. The barn. The barn was burning. Flames climbed the outer wall. Hungry. Fast. Relentless. The firelight illuminated moving figures near the trees. 4 riders. Masked. Armed. Cowards hiding behind darkness. Silas fired again. 1 horse bolted. A rider nearly fell. But the others kept moving. Too disciplined. Too organized. This wasn't random violence. This was planned. Very carefully planned. A sudden realization struck May. Silas glanced toward her. What? If the cabin burns, we lose everything. A nod. But the spring is still here. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then understanding appeared. The spring. The one resource Vernon desperately wanted. The one resource connecting everything. Water. Enough water to save the cabin. Enough water to save the records. Enough water to save the mountain. If they could reach it. That was the problem. The spring sat nearly a quarter-mile downhill. Outside. Exposed. Under rifle fire. Silas looked toward the flames. Then toward the spring line. Then back at May. She already knew what he was thinking. The risk. The danger. The impossibility. Too bad. She stood anyway. We need water. It's too exposed. We need water. Silence. Then another bottle exploded against the side of the cabin. Fire crawled across the porch. Decision made. Silas cursed softly. The first curse she'd ever heard from him. Then nodded. 3 minutes later they were running through darkness. May. Silas. 2 buckets. Gunfire cracked through the trees. Branches exploded nearby. Mud sprayed beneath their boots. The mountain had become a battlefield. The spring appeared ahead. Moonlight reflected across moving water. Beautiful. And life-saving. They filled buckets. Ran back uphill. Dumped water onto advancing flame. Again. 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 The process became exhausting almost immediately. But it worked. Slowly. Painfully. The fire stopped spreading. The cabin survived. Barely. The attackers realized it too. And suddenly their behavior changed. The gunfire stopped. Completely. The silence felt wrong. Dangerous. Silas noticed first. He lowered the bucket. Listening. Waiting. Then his face changed. Fear. Actual fear. The expression appeared so rarely that May almost didn't recognize it. Silas looked toward the stable. Then toward the tree line. Then toward the rear of the property. The horse. May froze. The horses. The attackers had stopped shooting, stopped burning, stopped advancing, because they weren't targeting the cabin anymore. They were targeting escape. Silas sprinted immediately. May followed. The stable came into view. Then disaster. The gate stood open, wide open. Several horses gone, including Silas' best trail horse, including the pack horse, including the fastest animal on the property. The theft wasn't random. It was strategic. Someone intended to trap them on the mountain. And as May stared at the empty stable, another realization arrived. The attackers knew exactly which horses to take, exactly which supplies to damage, exactly where to strike, which meant someone familiar with the property had helped plan everything. Someone local, someone who knew the mountain, someone close enough to observe them. A sound came from behind. Footsteps. Everyone spun. A figure emerged from the darkness. Alone. Unarmed. Hands raised. Silas immediately aimed the rifle. The stranger stopped, breathing heavily. Terrified, then stepped into the firelight. May recognized him instantly. Darius Pike, Vernon S. younger brother. The surveyor, the man who altered the boundary records, the man whose signature appeared throughout the fraudulent maps. His face looked grey. His clothes were soaked with sweat, and for the first time in his life, Darius Pike appeared completely broken. Mott need to talk. Nobody lowered a weapon. Nobody trusted him. Smartly. Darius swallowed, then looked directly at Silas. They've gone too far. Silence. The fire crackled behind them. Smoke drifted into the night. Finally May spoke. "What are you talking about?" The surveyor closed his eyes. Just briefly, as though gathering courage. Then he delivered a sentence that changed everything. Eli Mercer wasn't he murdered 20 years ago? The world seemed to stop. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Darius opened his eyes. Terror filled them. Real terror. Not guilt. Not shame. Fear. The fear of a man finally telling the truth. Because according to him, Eli Mercer never died at all. Nobody spoke. The words hung in the smoke-filled night like a gunshot that refused to fade. Eli Mercer was murdered 20 years ago. He never died at all. Darius Pike stood motionless beneath the firelight. His face looked hollow. The face of a man who had spent too many years carrying a secret too heavy for one person. Silas lowered the rifle slightly, not because he trusted him, because he wanted to hear the rest. May felt her heart pounding. Every assumption, every story, every rumor, everything they believed was suddenly shifting beneath their feet. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Darius swallowed. His gaze drifted toward the burning barn, then toward the dark mountain, then finally toward the photograph May still carried inside her coat. The body was never found. Silence. You know that. Nobody argued. Because it was true. Darius took another shaky breath. My father lied. Those 3 words carried more weight than a confession. Harold stared. Silas remained perfectly still. May waited. Darius looked toward the valley below, toward Grey Ridge, toward the empire built by the Pike family. Then he spoke. The night Eli disappeared, my father met him near the river. Silas' expression darkened immediately. He remembered that night. Every second of it. Darius continued. There was May felt cold. A fight over the wreck. Darius nodded. The theft. Another piece of the puzzle. Another layer removed. My father knew Eli had proof. Silence. He knew Thomas Dutton had copies. More silence. He knew everything was about to collapse. The surveyor looked exhausted. Years of lies seemed to be draining out of him all at once. So they confronted Eli. May's pulse accelerated. And the answer came softly. They didn't kill. Nobody moved. Darius rubbed his face. He escaped. For a second nobody reacted, because the statement felt impossible. Absurd. 20 years. 20 years of rumours. 20 years of grief. 20 years of legal battles. And now this man claimed Eli Mercer simply escaped. Silas spoke first. You researched? Darius nodded immediately. Yes. The surveyor hesitated, then reached inside his coat. Every muscle in Silas' body tightened, but Darius only removed a folded envelope. Old. Very old. Yellowed by time. The sight alone made May's stomach tighten, because old letters rarely brought simple answers. Darius handed it over. Silas opened it carefully. The handwriting inside looked unfamiliar to May, but not to Silas. The colour drained from his face. You know. Darius nodded. Silas looked at May, then handed her the letter. Her hands trembled slightly. She began reading. The first line stole her breath. Silas, if you rereading this, then something has gone terribly wrong. May stared, then continued. The signature at the bottom confirmed everything. Eli Mercer. Alive. At least when the letter was written. Her pulse thundered. The room disappeared. The fire. The smoke. The mountain. Everything vanished beneath the weight of the words. The letter explained what happened after the river. Eli escaped. Wounded. Barely alive. Terrified. He knew powerful men wanted him dead. He knew the evidence would destroy important people. Most importantly, he knew his child would become a target. So he vanished. Completely. Intentionally. Leaving behind his name. His property. His life. Everything. The decision had cost him dearly, but it protected someone. The child. The heir. The child Vernon Pike had spent 20 years trying to erase. May reached the final paragraph. Then froze. Her eyes widened. No. No. That couldn't be right. Silas noticed immediately. What? May couldn't answer. Her throat tightened. The words refused to leave. Harold leaned closer. What? Slowly she handed over the letter. Silas took it. Read the final paragraph. Then closed his eyes. A long silence followed. Finally May managed to speak. Nobody answered. She looked at Darius. Then at Silas. Then back again. The child is alive. A nod. Darius looked away, because everyone already knew that. The real question was worse. Much worse. Who? Silence. Absolute silence. The answer waited at the edge of the night. Too important. Too dangerous. Too explosive. Finally Darius spoke. The answer is inside the missing ledger. May froze. The missing ledger. Of course. The one hidden somewhere beneath the abandoned courthouse. The one proving ownership. Inheritance. Identity. Everything. Darius continued. My father never found it. Silas looked up sharply. What? He searched for years. Another shock. Another revelation. The Pike family didn't possess all the evidence. They were hunting for it too, which explained the desperation, the threats, the attacks, the legal pressure. Without the ledger, they could fully control the story. Without the ledger, the truth remained dangerous. Then another thought struck May. A terrible thought. If Darius knew all this, then Vernon probably knew she and Silas were close to the truth. Very close. Which meant the attack tonight wasn't the end. It was the beginning. As if summoned by the thought, hoofbeats echoed from somewhere below the mountain. Fast. Urgent. Several riders. Everyone turned. The sound grew louder. Closer. Harold went pale. Darius cursed. Silas immediately recognized what the others hadn't. His expression hardened. They recoming? Not 4 riders. Not 5. More. Many more. The sound rolled through the darkness like approaching thunder. Darius looked terrified, because unlike everyone else, he knew exactly who was riding up the mountain, and he knew why. They know I talk. The realization struck everyone simultaneously. The Pike family no longer had a leak. They had a traitor, and traitors rarely survived. Silas looked toward the cabin, toward the evidence, toward the mountain road, then toward May. A decision formed instantly. We leave. May blinked. The courthouse. Understanding hit her. The missing ledger. The abandoned basement. The final proof. If they waited until morning, Vernon would get there first. If they moved now, they still had a chance. A dangerous chance. But a chance. Silas grabbed his saddlebag. Harold gathered documents. Darius looked as though he wanted to run in the opposite direction. Yet he followed. Because he understood something important. There was nowhere left to hide. Not anymore. Minutes later they rode into the darkness. 4 riders. 1 lantern. A mountain trail. And the weight of 20 years riding beside them. The courthouse sat nearly 30 miles away. Across dangerous terrain. Across a flooded river crossing. Across territory controlled by Vernon Pike's allies. Every mile carried risk. Every hour mattered. Halfway down the mountain, rain began falling. Cold. Heavy. Relentless. The trail transformed into mud. Visibility vanished. Yet they kept moving, because somewhere ahead waited the missing ledger. The final piece. The truth. And if Eli Mercer's letter was accurate, that ledger would merely expose corruption. It would reveal the identity of the heir Vernon Pike had spent 20 years trying to erase. Then, just after midnight, Silas suddenly raised his hand. Everyone stopped. The mountain became silent. Too silent. No insects. No wind. No movement. Only rain. Then came the sound. A single rifle being cocked somewhere in the darkness, and a voice emerged from the trees. Calm. Confident. Familiar. That S-far. May felt her blood run cold, because she recognized the voice instantly. Vernon Pike had been waiting for them. The rain fell harder. Cold sheets of water hammered the mountain trail, turning the darkness into a shifting wall of black and silver. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The rifle hidden somewhere among the trees remained pointed directly at them. Vernon Pike stepped from the shadows. A lantern glowed in one hand. A revolver rested comfortably in the other. Behind him stood 6 riders. Armed. Waiting. Prepared. The trail had become a trap. May immediately understood something important. This wasn't a spontaneous ambush. Vernon had known where they were going. He had known about the courthouse. The missing ledger. Everything. Which meant information was still leaking. Or perhaps he simply knew them well enough to predict their next move. Either possibility was dangerous. Vernon's eyes settled on Darius first. Disappointment flickered across his face. Nothing more. No anger. No shouting. No threats. Just disappointment. The reaction somehow felt worse. You always were. Darius visibly flinched. The words hit harder than a fist. Vernon looked away from his brother. Toward Silas. Toward May. Toward the burlap sacks containing 20 years of evidence. Then he smiled. The same polished smile. The same practiced charm. The same mask. Only now everyone could see the rot underneath. Let's save ourselves some trouble. Nobody answered. Rain drummed against coats. Horses shifted nervously. The mountain listened. Vernon raised the revolver slightly. Hand over the document. Silas remained perfectly still. No. The answer came immediately. Simple. Final. Very Silas. Vernon's smile faded. A little. Think carefully. No. The second answer sounded exactly like the first. May almost smiled. Almost. Vernon sighed dramatically, as if reasonable conversation had failed him, as if violence were an unfortunate necessity. The performance might have worked years ago. Not tonight. Not anymore. You don't understand what's at stake. May finally spoke. We understand perfectly. Vernon's gaze shifted toward her. The mountain. No, she shook her head. The theft. Silence. The survey. More silence. The missing funds. Vernon's eyes narrowed. The dead witnesses. His expression hardened. Now the smile disappeared completely. Good. Finally. The truth had reached him. He knew they were close. Very close. For several seconds rain filled the silence. Then Vernon laughed. A genuine laugh this time. Not charming. Not friendly. Cold. Tired. Dangerous. You really think any of that mattered? The question surprised May. Not because of the words. Because of the sincerity. Vernon actually meant it. Years of power had convinced him consequences no longer applied. He looked toward Grey Ridge below. Lights flickered through the storm. The town. His town. His empire. Mort built everything down there. Nobody answered. Because part of it was true. Vernon continued. Road. A pause. Business. Another. Rain slid down his face. Mott turned a dying valley into something valuable. May listened carefully. Because villains rarely considered themselves villains, and Vernon Pike was no exception. He genuinely believed his own story. The problem was what came next. And sometimes, he said quietly, progress requires unpleasant choices. There it was. The justification. The lie people told themselves before crossing lines they could never uncross. Silas' voice cut through the rain. You killed. Vernon's eyes hardened. Mort protected what mattered. The answer chilled everyone. Because he wasn't denying it. Not really. Darius looked sick. Harold looked horrified. May felt something inside her settle. Not anger. Clarity. At last. Now she understood the man completely. Vernon Pike valued ownership more than truth. Control more than justice. Legacy more than human lives. Everything else came second. The realization made her strangely calm. Then something unexpected happened. Darius stepped forward. One step. Then another. Rain soaked his coat. His hands shook. Yet he kept moving. Vernon frowned. Darius, his younger brother, didn't stop. Darius. Still, he continued. For the first time in years. Perhaps decades. The surveyor looked directly at his older brother without fear. You should vev stop. The words emerged quietly, almost sadly. Vernon S.'s expression darkened. This is the place. 20 years ago, rain poured around them. After Eli disappeared, Darius swallowed. You should stop. The older man's jaw tightened. The mask cracked. Finally. Completely. Mott did what needed doing. Silence. Absolute silence. Because everyone heard it. The confession. Not legal. Not explicit. But enough. More than enough. Darius closed his eyes. The last illusion died. When he opened them again, tears mixed with rain. You ruined everything. Vernon raised the revolver. Not dramatically. Almost casually. That terrified May, because casual violence was always worse. Silas immediately moved. The rifle came up. 6 pike riders raised weapons. The world balanced on a knife edge. One trigger. One mistake. One heartbeat. Then a new sound interrupted everything. A horse. Approaching rapidly. Everyone turned. A lone rider emerged through the rain. Galloping hard. Desperate. The rider wore a county marshal escort. Behind him came more horses. Several. Many. Lanterns appeared through the darkness. Then more. Then more. Vernon S.'s face changed instantly. Not fear. Shock. For the first time all night. The marshal reached the trail. Pulled his horse to a stop. Then raised a document above his head. County Warrant. The words echoed across the mountain. Nobody moved. The marshal continued. Stand down. Vernon stared. Disbelief spread across his face. The man was supposed to be here. That much was obvious. The marshal unfolded the paper. Rain threatened to destroy it. Yet he read anyway. Loudly. Clearly. For everyone to hear. The warrant listed financial fraud, survey tampering, witness intimidation, attempted murder, conspiracy. Every charge supported by documents Harold had secretly mailed to the state capital 2 days earlier. A precaution. A smart one. One May had known about. One Vernon certainly hadn't known about. The rancher confidence finally cracked. Because for the first time this fight existed beyond Grey Ridge. Beyond local judges. Beyond local officials. Beyond his influence. State investigators were involved now. The game had changed. Vernon slowly lowered the revolver. The realization reached him. Not all at once. Piece by piece. Like a building collapsing. Then came the final blow. The marshal looked toward May. Did you find the Mercer evidence? May exchanged a glance with Silas. Then nodded. The marshal exhaled. Relief. Genuine relief. Good. He pointed toward the courthouse road. The state archivist opened the basement an hour ago. Silence. Everyone stared. The missing ledger. The final proof. Already found. Already recovered. May's pulse thundered. What did it say? The marshal looked directly at her. Then toward Vernon. Then back again. And the answer that followed shattered the final secret. The Mercer heir was identified. Nobody breathed. Rain hammered the mountain. The world narrowed. One sentence. One name. 20 years of lies waiting beneath it. Then the marshal spoke. And Vernon Pike closed his eyes. Because the truth he had spent 2 decades burying was finally free. The heir is May Dutton. For a moment, nobody reacted. The rain continued falling. The horses shifted. The mountain stood silent beneath the storm. Yet everything had changed. The heir is May Dutton. The words echoed through her mind. Again, and again, and again. Impossible. Absurd. Unthinkable. May stared at the marshal, then at Silas, then at the recovered documents in the burlap sacks. The world felt strangely distant, as though she were watching someone else's life unfold. The word barely escaped her lip. The marshal carefully removed another document from his satchel, protected beneath oilcloth, preserved against rain, protected for years. The final ledger. The missing ledger. The one everyone had hunted. The one people had threatened, lied, and bled for. The one Vernon Pike had spent 2 decades trying to erase. The marshal handed it to her. May's fingers trembled. Not from fear, from understanding, because somewhere deep inside, pieces were already connecting. The spring, the mountain, the hidden records, her father's involvement, Silas' promise, the photograph, everything. Slowly she opened the ledger. The pages were old, fragile, filled with names, transactions, notes. And then she found it. A sealed affidavit, signed by Eli Mercer, witnessed by Thomas Dutton, recorded but never submitted. May began reading. The rain disappeared. The riders disappeared. Everything disappeared. Only the words remained. Eli Mercer had fathered a daughter shortly before his disappearance. The childmother had died during childbirth. Fearing retaliation from the Pike family after uncovering the theft scheme, Eli entrusted the child to the only man he trusted completely, Thomas Dutton. The affidavit granted temporary guardianship, legal protection, inheritance rights. Everything. Then came the final sentence. If harm should come to me, my daughter shall be raised as Thomas Dutton's own until such time as the truth can safely be revealed. May stopped breathing. The signature at the bottom looked unmistakably genuine. Eli Mercer, her biological father. Thomas Dutton, the man who raised her, the man who loved her, the man who sacrificed everything for her. Tears blurred her vision. Not because Thomas wasn't her father. He was, in every way that mattered, but because she suddenly understood the burden he had carried, the secrets, the fear, the responsibility. 20 years. 20 years of protecting a child who wasn't biologically his. 20 years of guarding a truth dangerous enough to kill for. 20 years of silence. May closed the ledger, carefully, lovingly, as if touching a final gift from the man she missed every day. Across the trail, Vernon Pike looked older, not defeated, older, the weight of decades finally visible. The marshal stepped forward. Vernon Pike, you are under arrest. Nobody moved. Not even Vernon. For the first time in perhaps 30 years, he had run out of places to hide, run out of lies, run out of influence. Eventually he handed over the revolver. The motion seemed to age him another 10 years. The riders behind him followed, one by one. Weapons lowered. Resistance disappeared. The fight was over, not because someone fired the final shot, because the truth survived, and truth had finally become stronger than fear. Weeks later, Grey Ridge looked different. The town itself hadn't changed much. The buildings remained the same. The roads remained the same. The mountains certainly remained the same. But the people had changed. Truth tends to do that. State investigators uncovered decades of fraud, hidden accounts, stolen funds, forged surveys, missing contracts. The evidence from the mountain proved devastating. The Pike Empire collapsed piece by piece. Several officials resigned. Others faced prosecution. Some simply disappeared, trying to outrun consequences. Few succeeded. For the first time in years, Grey Ridge belonged to itself again, and for the first time in her life, May walked through town without lowering her eyes. Not because she inherited land. Not because she won. Because she finally understood her own worth. The people who once mocked her seemed smaller now. Their opinions carried less weight. Much less. Especially after the bakery reopened. Bigger than before. Boozier than before. Stronger than before. The women of the town arrived first. Then families. Then ranch hands. Then travellers. The bakery became more than a business. It became a gathering place. A symbol. Proof that dignity survives humiliation. Proof that kindness survives cruelty. Proof that competence eventually earns respect. One autumn afternoon, nearly 6 months after the storm, May stood outside the bakery watching children play near the town square. Leaves drifted through golden sunlight. Church bells rang softly. Life moved forward. Finally. Behind her, familiar footsteps approached. Slow. Steady. Comforting. Silas. He still spoke less than most people. Still preferred mountains to crowds. Still hated attention. Some things never changed. Fortunately, May turned. He carried a small wooden box. Weathered. Simple. The sort of object another person might overlook. Not her. She immediately recognized careful craftsmanship. Silas stopped beside her. For several seconds neither spoke. Then he handed over the box. May opened it. Inside rested the silver key. The same key. The same one he guarded for 20 years. The same one connected to promises, secrets, and sacrifice. She looked up, confused. Silas met her gaze. You should... Emotion tightened her throat. What? His answer came quietly. Because important truths rarely need volume. Because it was always yours. The simplicity nearly broke her. Not because of the key. Because of everything behind it. The years. The loyalty. The promise he kept. The burden he carried. The way he protected her long before she knew protection was needed. The way he respected her long before he loved her. And there it was. Finally. Not spoken. Not dramatically declared. Simply present. Like sunlight after winter. Like warmth inside a cabin. Like home. May closed the box. Then took his hand. The gesture surprised both of them. Silas glanced down. Then back up. A rare smile appeared. Small. Real. Beautiful. Neither needed words. Not anymore. A year later the mountain looked different too. New fencing. Repaired barns. Fresh paint. Healthy livestock. The spring flowed freely through restored channels. Children's laughter occasionally echoed across the property. Something nobody would have imagined years earlier. Because homes become different when loneliness leaves. One evening, as sunset painted the mountains gold, May stood on the cabin porch. The same cabin, the same mountains, the same land, yet everything felt transformed. A loaf of bread cooled beside the window. Fresh stew simmered on the stove. Smoke rose peacefully into the evening sky. Inside, Silas sat at the table reviewing supply inventories. The sight made her smile. A practical man. Always. He looked up. Noticed her watching. Something... May shook her head. He returned to the ledger, satisfied. A moment later she stepped inside. Warmth wrapped around her immediately. Firelight danced across familiar wall. The locked room remained open now. No more secrets. No more fear. Only history. Preserved. Honoured. Understood. May crossed the room and rested a hand against the old photograph hanging above the fireplace. 3 men. Eli Mercer. Thomas Dutton. Silas Callahan. 3 lives forever connected. 3 sacrifices that made this future possible. Then she looked toward the window. Toward the spring. Toward the mountains beyond. Toward the home they had built together. Not through magic. Not through luck. Through work. Trust. Truth. And love that arrived slowly enough to be real. Outside, evening settled across the land. Inside, the cabin glowed warmly against the coming night, and for the first time in a very long time, there were no secrets left waiting in the dark. Only home and peace.